Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the RGPF Media briefing, touching on concerning the new COVID-19 Regulation Number 3, SRNO 17 of 2020. My name is Vannie, Superintendent of Police in charge of the Community Relations and Professional Standards Department of the Royal Grenada Police Force. With me this morning is Superintendent Connaught, in charge of the Traffic and Transport Department of the RGPF. This morning, our task is to brief the nation on the new RGPF operational design that will give effect to the new COVID-19 regulations which came into effect on Monday of this week and will remain in force until April the 20th, 2020. However, before we begin, let me profoundly apologize to you, the media, and the listening public for the abrupt end to our daily media briefing which happened due to technical glitches on our end. Therefore, this morning we are reaching out to you through the services of the Grenada Information Services. So to get straight into it, we'll first deal with the new regulation and provide some educational background as to what the Act provides for and the RGPF responses operationally to the new Act. The Emergency Powers COVID-19 Number 2 Regulations, SRNO Number 16 of 2020, under which we operated from March the 30th, 2020 to April the 6th, 2020, has been repealed and replaced by the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Regulations Number 3, SRNO Number 17 of 2020. Most of the provisions of the old regulations Number 2 have been carried over into this new regulation Number 3. But there are some significant new provisions that the public need to become familiar with over the next 2 weeks. This new regulation, and by extension the curfew, came into effect at 12 noon on April the 6th, 2020 and will terminate or end at 7 a.m. on April the 20th, 2020. I would just like to take us through a few of the provisions that are relevant and the public needs to be reminded of. So first I want to start with the restriction of movement, which is section 2. And this section says, for the next 24 hours, the curfew remains in effect. 24-hour curfew remain in effect. During this period, every person shall remain confined to the place of residence to avoid contact outside of the household, except exempted or authorized in writing by the Commissioner of Police on the directive of the Cabinet of Grenada. A new subsection to this section was created to say this, which is very instructive and very important, that every person shall, not may, not might, every person shall take reasonable steps to ensure that whenever he is outside of his place of residence, he wears a mask or suitable covering over his nose and mouth. Failure to adhere to this section can get you arrested. Working remotely from home for some businesses remain in force. Public service, statutory bodies, state-owned enterprises, and courts will do likewise except as directed by the Secretary to the Cabinet. All establishments of business shall remain closed except for those exempted under the regulations, to include but not limited to shops which sell groceries, grocery stores, and supermarkets on designated days by the Commissioner of Police acting on the direction of the Cabinet. Doctor's office, medical facilities, and pharmacies are also included. And I want to stress pharmacies here because we have been receiving quite a lot of calls as to what pharmacies will be open. Pharmacies is an exception to the businesses that should be closed, and therefore pharmacies will be open. Subsection 5 of Section 5 of the new Act created a significant change from the old regulations, wherein the old provision said there shall be no sale or consumption of alcohol in any public place. This new regulation now says there shall be no consumption of alcohol in or in the vicinity of any shop, grocery store, or supermarket, or in any public place. What is the difference here? The difference is in the old act, you could not sell or consume alcohol in public place. The new act changes in some way to allow businesses to sell alcohol, but restrict consumption in business places and in public. The long and short of the matter is, you can purchase your alcohol, but you must consume it in the privacy of your home or some private place and not in public. I want to make this point abundantly clear though. That does not legitimate the rum shops to be opened. And I want to reiterate that. That does not legitimate the rum shop or legitimize the rum shops to be open. They must remain closed because they are not an exception under the provisions. However, grocery stores who sell alcohol can be purchased from those stores but must be consumed in privacy, not in the stores and not in public places. The physical distancing protocol of 6 feet for businesses, staff, and individuals remain in force. Essential workers maintain the meaning assigned under the outgoing legislation and must at all times carry personal identification. And I want to make a distinction here between essential services and essential workers, because we have been having tremendous difficulty dealing with employees of essential services. But not all employees of essential services becomes essential worker. Each business must determine who are essential workers for the purposes of the Act, and not all employees will definitely fall under that categorization. So you can be an employee of an essential business but not be considered an essential worker, and therefore the Act does not reflect you. Restriction on social activities and funerals remain in force. The long and short is that there shall be no social activities and no funeral for the next few days until the 20th of April 2020. Restriction on domestic travel remain in force. Movement on grocery day, which I will come back to a little bit later, and restriction on road traffic, which Superintendent Connaught will address, will come up in a few minutes. Restriction on visitations to persons in quarantine or isolation, patients in hospital, and detainees in prison remain in force. You should not visit those locations. Section 16 speaks to mandatory reporting and isolation. I don't want to spend a minute or two just to be able to educate the public on a few of the sections of Section 16. And Section 16.1 says, a person who has traveled into the state of Grenada on or after the 9th of March 2020 shall immediately place himself in isolation and notify a police station in his parish in accordance with the Parish Boundaries Act. Subsection 2 says, a person under self-isolation, under Sub-Regulation 1, or under observation or surveillance for the purposes of the Quarantine Act, Chapter 271, or the Public Health Act, Chapter 263, shall install on all of his mobile devices as far as is possible, and for the duration of his surveillance, comply with the instructions of the surveillance mobile application as per approved by the Ministry of Health. Sub-Regulation 3. Any person who is aware that he has been in contact with any person who has traveled into Grenada on or after the 9th day of March 2020 shall immediately notify a police station in his parish in accordance with the Parish Boundaries Act, Chapter 244, and await instructions. Subsection 4. Any person who is exhibiting any flu-like symptoms shall immediately notify a police station in his parish in accordance with the Parish Boundaries Act, Chapter 244. Subsection 5, Sub-Regulation 5. Any person who has observed that any other person is exhibiting flu-like symptoms shall notify a police station in his parish in accordance with the Parish Boundaries Act. What these new sections seeks to do is not only put the emphasis or onus on the persons affected, but it gives all of us citizens an opportunity to assist in the fight of the spread of the COVID-19 virus. So if you know or have seen somebody exhibiting flu-like symptoms, you have a responsibility to report it to the police station in your parish. Any person who is asked by any official of the Ministry of Health to submit himself to any testing for COVID-19 shall submit to such testing. Any person who is directed by the Ministry of Health to submit himself to self-isolation or quarantine shall comply with the direction. We have had several reports from across the country of persons who should be in isolation have been seen walking the streets and carrying on business like everyone else. These new provisions now criminalize that behavior, and you can now be arrested for this action. Penalties. The penalties in the new regulation is the same penalty as was in regulation number 2, which is a maximum fine of $1,000 or maximum term of imprisonment of 12 months. There is a new sub-regulation under Regulation 17 and the creation of Regulation 18, which now caters for fixed penalty tickets to be issued for offences committed under the regulation. I will not go through all of the sections, but I will just deal with a few of what the Section 6 to criminalize. Restriction on road traffic, Regulation 13, Sub-Regulation 1. Restriction on transportation, Regulation 14, Sub-Regulation 1. Restriction on visitation, Regulation 16.8, refusal to submit to isolation or quarantine. These 4 sections are now sections that you can now be ticketed for if you're in violation of them. Ticketing in the sense of a traffic ticket as we would do to motorists on the road. That is the same designation when I refer to ticket. So instead of being arrested and charged, you can be ticketed and be required to pay a fine at the court. I will now turn to the operational issues of the RGPF for this week under the new Act. Starting with resupply and delivery days. Today, Wednesday, April the 8th, 2020, and tomorrow, Thursday, April the 9th, 2020, are designated resupply and delivery days. I want to thank members of the media who on short notice last night was able to get that message out to us, and we really do appreciate that. The resupply and delivery days account for clearing and unpacking of containers on the St. George's Port and island-wide distribution to retail outlets. I want to take that point again. The resupply and delivery days, today and tomorrow, are for unpacking of containers on the St. George's Port and island-wide distribution to retail outlets. On these 2 days, suppliers and supply trucks will be resupplying grocery stores and supermarkets throughout the country, across parish boundaries between the hours of 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. ahead of our next designated shopping days of Saturday and Sunday, which I will come to in a few minutes. Businesses and persons wishing to take advantage of this window of opportunity and have not yet done so are advised to secure passes for that purpose. No delivery must be conducted on any other day, and I want to reiterate that. No delivery must be conducted on any other day except today and tomorrow. This also applies to companies involved in manufacturing. So major suppliers and manufacturers, today and tomorrow are your delivery days, ahead of the next shopping days, which will be Saturday and Sunday. Having said that, the next shopping days will be Saturday, April the 11th, 2020, and Sunday, April the 12th, 2020. We are experimenting with a new sequencing, and so shopping on these 2 days will be conducted by alphabetical sequencing in 2 tranches by surnames, first A to M and N to Z, and I'm going to explain. On Saturday the 11th, persons whose last name or surname starts with an A to M will shop from 8 a.m. to 12 noon. And persons with surnames starting from N to Z will shop from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. you would notice there is a space of an hour, 1 hour between the two shopping periods. And this is necessary so to allow the first tranche to complete their shopping before we start accessing persons from N to Z. So let me take this again. On Saturday, the 11th of April, 2020, persons with surnames starting from A to M will shop from 8 a.m. to 12 noon. And persons with surnames starting with N to Z will shop from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. The following day, which is Sunday the 12th, the reverse is going to go into effect, meaning that surnames from N to Z will now shop from 8 a.m. to 12 noon, and surnames from A to M will shop from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. Now, why this is necessary? The powers that be have been listening to all of the complaints that we had on the ground. You would appreciate that for the last couple of days, shopping days were very chaotic, disorganized, and it caters for the clustering of persons violating the 6 feet physical distancing protocol. To avoid this new sequencing system is now being introduced as a trial run to see how well it works going forward. The schedule varies to allow early shopping for category 1, which is A to M, on day 1, and early shopping for category 2, which is N to Z, on day 2. However, shopping must be conducted by parish, with the exception of St. David's that is allowed to cross into St. George, as happened a few days ago. All other parishes must maintain the integrity of parish-based shopping to maintain distancing protocol and to reduce crowd density. Persons desirous of shopping on those 2 days must present a PITIA identification. And I want to say this again. Persons desirous of shopping on those 2 days must present a PITIA identification. Persons without identification and those who do not fit into the respective categories will not be served. Persons without identification and those who do not fit into the respective categories will not be served. Note, there is no shortage of food on the island, so there is no need for panic shopping. I want to say this again. As coming from the business sector, there is no shortage of food on the island, and therefore there is no need for panic shopping. Refueling. Refueling for essential workers will take place today, Wednesday, April the 8th, and on Friday, April the 10th, 2020. This category of workers include police officers, prison officers, doctors, nurses, private security employees, registered and approved farmers, and others as established in the Emergency Powers Regulations, SRNO number 17 of 2020. Please allow me to speak a little bit more on farmers. As it stands, not all farmers will be allowed to access the gas pumps this morning. Farmers that are being considered now as farmers who have nurseries or farmers who are involved in animal husbandry, farmers who have nurseries or farmers who have animals to tend, or other registered and recognized farmers will be considered. We understand that all farmers or all categorization of farmers will not be able to access the pump. We expect some disappointments, but I can assure you that the powers that be are working feverishly to ensure that all farmers at some point will be able to fill up at the pumps. There is one addition to gas stations this morning. Previously, we have had the Decal service station open, R&R at Grenville, St. Andrews open, and Victoria in St. Mark's. Adding to the list this morning will be Otway service station at Curwen James Boulevard. So there are now 4 gas stations that will be open to service essential workers this morning and Friday. Decal service station in Tempe, Amongue, R&R at Grenville, the Victoria Service Station, and commencing from this morning, Otway Service Station at the Curwen James Boulevard. Applying for passes. When applying for passes, the following information must be submitted. For farmers, the name of the person or persons, the vehicle number to be used, if any, the origin and destination, where you're coming from or where you intend to go, and the time of travel must be submitted to the police headquarters. Please note, passes to be used only for intended purposes only. Caregivers, the information to be submitted must be name of person or persons, vehicle number to be used if necessary, movement and location, and time of movement. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Superintendent Randy Connaught, who's going to take us through some traffic arrangement for the next 2 weeks, after which we'll be happy to have a few questions from you, the members of the public, which we will seek to answer.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Superintendent Curwen. And I want to first start off by expressing my sincere appreciation to GIS and to the media fraternity for readily supporting the efforts of the RGPF and for providing without much notice, I should say, the availability of your staff to cover all the very important public announcements. It is also imperative that I extend and commend the general public, especially vehicle owners, in these very trying times, as the observance and understanding of the level of policing engagement that is required by us, members of the RGPF, as we seek to ensure that we restrict community transmission of this dreaded COVID-19 disease that is plaguing not just Grenada, but the entire world. It is an occasion for us to adopt to the new norms, and the new norms, as indicated by Superintendent Curwen, with the enactment of the Emergency Powers Regulations. And there are stipulations that we must adhere to in order for us to ensure that our country, Grenada, remains safe. Since the declaration of the Emergency Powers Regulation, the Traffic Department has instituted a new operational posture, which is guided by the provisions of the law and also in sync with the protocols and policies of the Royal Grenada Police Force, guided under the authority of the Commissioner of Police. I must say that we are in unprecedented times, and the policing effort must reflect the criticality of this global pandemic as we seek again to ensure the safety of our citizens. Now, since the declaration of the temporary state of emergency, a number of traffic control measures were adopted and continues to be enforced. And as explained by Superintendent Curwen, this is the posture that would be maintained for the next 2 weeks to come. And so therefore it is very important that members of the general public pay particular attention to those protocols that would be in place. As was from the commencement of the emergency regulations, we will sustain our efforts in the vehicular checkpoints that are established across the island. And these checkpoints are strategically positioned to ensure, and especially as we move into the third phase, that parish boundary regulations are maintained. We also would continue our efforts with the static checkpoints to ensure that persons within parish boundaries do not use the opportunity, even though you have a special access permit, to move without any sense of purpose. And that is what we want persons to ensure, that whenever you move, it must be with a sense of purpose. Your permit is not an exclusive right to just traverse the area. This would be supplemented by our mobile patrols, which obviously would be increased throughout the towns and suburbs across the island. And our operations generally would be intelligence-based, and our enforcement and management operation on shopping days and refueling days also, as approved by the Commissioner of Police, would see heightened presence of not just only traffic officers for the maintenance of law and order and the traffic regulations, but to ensure that at least the distancing protocols are maintained. Now, It was alluded to before in the presentation made by Superintendent Curwen that special access permits would be granted for persons of a certain category of workers to access the public roadway, and not just public roadway, also for private roadway also. And the term essential workers apply to the category of persons mandated under Section 7, subsection 1 to 5 of the regulations. And these passes have conditions, they are condition-based, and that is what I want individuals to particularly pay attention to. Because everyone holding such a permit can or most likely would be engaged by a police officer to determine his or her movement and also to verify the legitimacy of that permit. Now what that means is that persons who are using the permit can expect to be engaged at every checkpoint, and there will be, as I mentioned before, increased police visibility. So the advice going forward for members of the motoring public is to adhere to some simple protocols that would ease your access to those checkpoints and to ensure that there is no acrimony between you and the police officers trying to ensure that the laws are applied. So for ease of facilitating access to a police checkpoint, motorists are advised to display their passes and to have a photo-bearing ID with them. Also on the approach of every checkpoint, you're advised to roll down your windows and to put your house light on. That is in the case that if you're traveling by night. So the police can have clear visibility throughout the vehicle. Because remember, our safety is of paramount importance at every checkpoint, and this poses a unique challenge for every police officer having to be on a checkpoint on a daily basis, and especially those performing duties at night. Deployment of checkpoints are based on strategic intent and can be placed at any location around the island. So don't be too familiar as to where you can find a checkpoint. Checkpoints will move from time to time, and this is what we want persons to be aware of, because public knowledge is critical in the way the police operate, and so there will be a general level of understanding that there are things that you would most likely run into when coming towards a police checkpoint or engage in a police patrol. The seating accommodation must be observed as stipulated in the emergency regulations, section 13(1)A, and that is to deal with the restrictions on traffic. And this specifically deals with the seating protocol that was outlined by Superintendent Curwen. Now, in the first week of the protocol, when public service vehicles were allowed to travel the road and to engage with passengers, there were a number of violations, and a number of individuals, bus operators, were arrested. Now, the same applies to companies and institutions who have engaged those vehicles to transport staff. The 6 feet, or the distancing protocol, for motor vehicles must be complied with, and that is staggered, is 5 persons per vehicle and seated in a staggered formation, 1 passenger to every row. The regulation also applies to business institutions, as I said, and they would have to make all the necessary arrangements for the staff to get to and from work. As mentioned before, you have the category of essential workers, but within that category there are persons who might be critical in supporting business operations, and not all persons, even if you're working in an establishment that is deemed to be an essential establishment, but there are categories of workers in that establishment who necessarily would not have to be called out for duty and can otherwise work from their homes. And all the applications for access pass has been moved to the authority, is being guided under the authority of the Commissioner of Police, and we have had many calls to the traffic department for persons seeking access passes or seeking clarity as to how they can obtain access passes. And I would want to provide you with 2 email addresses for easy access to the secretariat, the COVID secretariat at police headquarters. And it is rgpfcovidops@gmail.com. I repeat, rgpfcovidops@gmail.com or rgpfcovidops@rgpf.gd. Again, rgpfcovidops@rgpf.gd. A lot of mention was made by Mr. Curwen regarding the fueling of vehicles and those days designated for the refueling of vehicles owned and operated by emergency personnel, and also for farmers, or that category of farmers that he highlighted, and for the delivery trucks. On those days, persons must adhere to the directions given by police officers manning those facilities. By that I mean, you'll be required to queue in the designated area, and each and every driver must be in a position to formally identify himself by means of an identification that he is or she is an essential worker, and that you have the requisite permission to be on the road at that particular time. Because remember, fueling days are not the ordinary shopping days where everybody and anybody can be outside. So it is critical that you walk with your piece of ID and you are able to prove that you fall within that category of individuals who are allowed to be refueled. The RGPF again reserves the right to refuse anyone from accessing fuel, providing that he or she is misrepresenting themselves. And also, as an occasion that I had to personally deal with, there was an individual who fell into that category of persons, but chose to come on a second day of refueling with a vehicle that is belonging to someone else. So these are some of the issues that we have to deal with on a daily basis. We have seen occasions where persons are coming into the fuel pumps with bottles, gas bottles, or containers to collect gas, and this would not be permitted. There is some exception to the rule where farmers who are operating pumps to the rivers or generating systems for the chicken farms or otherwise, but then again, that has to be assessed based on the information that is provided. And I can assure you that whatever you see would be checked and verified. I have since deployed my office, with my officers, the necessary capability for them to access our motor vehicle app to verify whether or not the vehicles that are coming to the pumps are indeed owned by the individuals who are coming and seeking refueling of those vehicles. I want to repeat, we are equipped to verify and check each and every vehicle that is coming to the pump. And may I also hasten to advise that you should work with whatever documentation, maybe by way of your insurance certificate, that there is some claim of ownership to that vehicle if you are seeking to access the pumps from henceforth and going forward. Our unique challenge comes around when we have those shopping days, and I am happy to hear that there is a provision in place to do an alphabetical style approach so as to minimize not just the volume of persons coming to shop, but the volume of traffic on the public roadway, which indeed has been a significant challenge for the traffic department. Again, the parish boundary limitation would be in effect, and we'll be enforcing and holding very strong to those parish boundaries, with the exception of St. David, who obviously only can come into St. George to make such purchases. Again, it is one person per family that can come out to shop, so we don't expect to see 2 and 3 persons in a motor vehicle coming to shop. And persons must adhere to the directives given by the police officer in uniform conducting his duty at the time. I want to also indicate that no motor vehicle, or let me take that over, as stipulated in the regulation number 14.1, no person shall offer for hire or seek to travel on any motor omnibus or any hiring car or taxi. And by this I mean a motor omnibus or hiring car shall have the same meaning as signed under the Road Traffic Act, Chapter 289A. Again, as stipulated in the regulations number 14.1, no person shall offer for hire or seek to travel on any motor omnibus or any hiring car or taxi. So those services should not be made available to the general public. With the declaration of the temporary emergency regulations, there have been drastic reduction in the number of motor vehicle accidents that we have seen, and will allow for maybe some explanation if those questions are posed in the question and answer period. But I must say, what concerns us is the few individuals who, without regard for the personal safety, the safety of others, place themselves and others at grave risk when they breach the regulation, and especially in this case, the road traffic regulations, and the regulations are stipulated under the Emergency Powers Act. So we once again want to appeal to members of the general public to ensure that you strictly comply with the provisions of the Act, because I can assure you that the police would be out in the numbers, not just out in the numbers, but will be engaging you and will be taking necessary action as authorized under the provisions of the law to ensure that the safety of our nation and the safety of the citizens alike remains intact. Your reckless and unwanted misbehavior would not be tolerated. I want to again assure the general public that the traffic department and by extension the Royal Grenada Police Force stands resolute and is committed to our mandate to ensure that we protect life and property, taking into consideration also that we have taken the oath of office to place ourselves at great risk to ensure the safety of our citizens. So I thank you.
We would now open the floor for if there are any questionings from members of the media. We'll try to answer as many of your questions as possible.
All right, Sherry Ann Noel is online. Sherry Ann?
Thank you. Good morning. I have a couple questions. First to Superintendent Curwen. You mentioned one of the first areas I want to get some clarity on. You mentioned the issue of funerals. That there will be no funerals for the next 20 days. The undertakers are pleading and had asked for a question we put in if they can at least get 1 day bodies buried. Will any consideration be given to that? Because it seems as if they're coming down with a heavy load now and they need to ease up bits. You know, one of the funeral agencies is under construction, so space is a bit limited. So will any consideration given to the undertakers to at least bury some of the dead?
Well, that is a good question, Sherry Ann, but I don't think from where I sit, I am in a position to say whether or not that will or will not be done. Those are provisions in the Act, and therefore this is the law. And there will have to be some amendment, or government will have to give some consideration for that to happen. But as it stands now, this is the law that we all must obey and abide by, and this is what it is now.
You have another question, Sherry? We're not hearing you.
Yes, I do.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. With reference to the shopping sequencing, in terms of the identification, people would like to know who do you have to present identification to? Police checkpoints, or is it when you're about to enter the particular grocery store?
There will be additional police officers set up at each of the major supermarkets to ensure that persons accessing the service are persons who should access the service. So yes, police officers will be on point to check for the identification to ensure that you are in the category that you say you're at, and that you are who you say you are at in terms of the identification.
And part two of that question, we all know that the voter's registration card, which most people use as an ID card, is expired. For those who wouldn't have an NIS card or a license, what will be used in that case to allow them entry into supermarkets?
We accept the fact that not everyone may be in possession of a picture identification. So the police officers at the respective points, they were trained and spoken to, and so some discretion will be exercised to ensure that persons can get the service. We wouldn't want to deny somebody buying foodstuff because they cannot properly identify themselves, because their identification doesn't have a picture ID on it. At the end of the day, that's not the intent here. The intent here is to have people to shop, but have them shop in an orderly and organized fashion. So in cases where that cannot be ascertained, discretion of the police officers will be used, but the underlying reason is to ensure that persons who need those essential service items can access them.
Okay, and I'm going to ask another question before and then come back later on. In terms of the refueling for farmers, you made specific mention of those with nurseries and animal husbandry. But those farmers who have the short crops, like a set of tomatoes and cabbage and lettuce and those things that they need to tend to, there are information coming in from farmers in St. Patrick's and so. They're trying to figure out how do they get to the refuel, and also in terms of private homes, to get to most of the public transportation, they're not working because they deem it not feasible. If private vehicle owners are not given the opportunity to refuel in case of emergencies and so on, even to get to the groceries, this is becoming a problem. So will any consideration be given within to allow at least a day for private vehicle owners to get some fuel in case they have an emergency, and also to get to the various grocery stores?
Let me take your first question first, Sharian. As it relates to the farmers, in previous days that we have had fueling, we have allowed farmers, a broad cross-section of farmers to refuel. You will appreciate that not all farmers would be able to refuel on any of the given designated days for fueling. And so for this particular period, we want to focus mainly on the farmers who have nurseries, as I indicated, or those who are into animal husbandry. I know as a fact, and Mr. Connaught is here, can bear me out, that several other category of farmers were allowed to fill up in days prior to these particular, today and on Friday. They were allowed to fill up. And so while we cannot take all of the farmers on any given day, we have to find a systematic and organized way in which to allow certain sectors of the farming community to come in. And to answer your second question, the answer is definitive. Yes, that the authorities are giving consideration for not only farmers across the spectrum of farming, but for the general public to refill at some point. Those considerations are now before them. They are looking at it, and I am hoping that not long from now, we might be able to announce a day that will be given for the population on a whole to be refueled.
All right, Mikey Hutchinson has a question. Mikey, go ahead.
Okay, good morning. I noticed that some of my media colleagues are trying to get into the meeting and they're not able to. I also had troubles getting into the meeting, and for that reason, I missed probably the better half of the presentation. So I apologize if I cannot speak to or ask any questions with regards to what was mentioned prior to me coming into the meeting. Being that as it may, for what I've heard and for questions that I have received, there are some concerns regarding other persons who may not fall under the category of essential or emergency workers who may have legitimate reasons as to why they may require fuel in their vehicle. Is the police willing to at least give some sort of consideration to such category of persons?
Good morning, Mikey. As expressed by Superintendent Curwen, the matter is before the committee that is deliberating upon those special requests, but I am certain that maybe in the not too distant future that some consideration would be given to facilitate the refueling of persons who does not exactly fall into the category of emergency workers but have legitimate reasons to have the vehicles refueled to ensure that the safety and security and the well-being of their loved ones who doesn't necessarily live with them, but they have to move caregivers from point A to point B. I am sure that that consideration would be given some very serious thought, and we can look forward to some favorable response in the not too distant future. But that is something that the committee has to deliberate upon before directives can be given to the police.
Mikey, you have another question? All right, somebody's asking about what about banking because ATMs are not sufficient.
We have heard the complaint about the banking sector. Banks, as of now, should remain closed. The ATMs should be accessible. You can access the ATMs. They may not be sufficient to do all of what you want to do in terms of processing a check, for instance. May not be able to be done at the ATM. But these are the facilities that are currently accessible to be used. Banks remain closed until such time.
All right, I have one here, let me see. There's one here from Linda Streaker. The penalties for violating, how much time will we be given to pay and what are the fees, referring to the new ticketing measure? And then the second question, is there a no-burn policy in place for the dry season? So the first one, the penalties for violating, how much time will be given to pay and what are the fees, referring mainly to the new ticketing measure that you spoke about, and then is there no burn policy in place right now for the dry season?
Good morning again. With respect to the fixed penalty ticketing system, it is applied similarly to the ticketing system that we currently use. So any person having to be issued with a ticket has 31 days in which they have to pay that ticket. Failure, then the police would initiate proceedings at the court, and the court will deliberate upon that matter. For persons in his first case being issued with a first ticket under the special regulations, there would be a penalty affixed of $500. That's for the ticket. A second case, a fine of $750, and in any subsequent case, $1,000. But I hasten to say that the $1,000 is also attached to a penalty of 12 months of imprisonment. So it's $1,000 or 12 months imprisonment for non-compliance with the fines, once convicted.
And you're saying the 12 months, they're both and or? Is it and or is it the $1,000 and the 12 months imprisonment?
For clarity, we just wish to consult the Act so that at least we give accurate information to the public.
Okay, so in the meantime, maybe we can deal with the no-burn policy for the no-burn policy.
We do have a policy on the burning of shrubs or vegetation during the dry season, and that policy is still in force. As a matter of fact, just a couple of days ago, the fire department had to respond to a fire at St. David, and this resulted in one person being arrested for burning agricultural lands without the prescribed license from the agricultural department. So yes, to the question, the no-burn policy is still in effect and should be observed by all.
Let me get back to the question that was asked in regard to the fixed penalty, and I'm going to just read the law and just see what it says. It says, without prejudice to sub-regulation 1, a person who commits an offense by contravening, and it gives a number of those sections, 13, 14, 15, and 16, is liable liable on service of a fixed penalty noticed by a police officer if the person so chooses to a fixed penalty of, and this is where it speaks now. In the first case, $500. In the second case, $750, and in any subsequent case, $1,000. So these are the three categorizations of fines: 500, 700, and 1,000. First instance, second instance, or subsequent instances. And I'm going to read something one as well for emphasis. It says, a person who contravenes or fails to comply with these regulations or any direction for the purposes of these regulations shall be guilty of an offense and on summary conviction liable to a fine of not exceeding $1,000 and to imprisonment to a term not exceeding 12 months. Let me make some distinction here to these two parts of the section. Section 17 is what you call the general penal section of the regulation. So barring 13, 14, 15, and 16, which deals with fixed penalty, for violation of any of the other provisions, it's a fine of $1,000 and up to imprisonment of 12 months. But speaking specific to the fixed penalty, If you choose to go that route, it's 500, 700, and 1,000. So there is a distinction here with the penalty in the Act. The general penalty for general offenses, fine up to 1,000, or imprisonment of up to 12 months, and specifically to the fixed penalty is 500, 700, and 1,000. It means that if you choose to go by way of the fixed penalty, you would avoid having to face the 12-month imprisonment. You will only be allowed to pay either $5, $7, or $1,000.
And may I add here that if you so choose to pay the fixed penalty, then you will be avoiding a conviction in court if the matter has to go and be deliberated at the court and you're found guilty of the offense.
Someone else is asking, what is the seating arrangement for service vehicles and sales vans that need to have a 2 to 3 man team? What protocols should they observe in that case?
The same protocol is applied here. Whether it's a public service vehicle, a goods vehicle, a private car, the same seating protocol. There should be one person in a row and seated diagonally. We do understand the challenges of most public goods vehicles. It is like a panel van or a box truck, and it only caters for 3 passengers, a driver and 2 passengers to the front. But also important to be aware of is the fact that you need to wear your protective gears, your face mask as alluded to by Superintendent Curwen, and if possible, gloves, and have your sanitizing equipment and your gels in the cab so that you will be replenishing yourself as often as you can and making sure that you don't expose yourself wantonly to the spread of the coronavirus, whether in cab or if you're engaging persons on the outside. So it's very important that you observe the seating protocol as stipulated in the regulations.
Mikey? Go ahead, Mikey.
Okay. I want us to speak a little to the essential workers policy, because I get the impression that we seem to interpret essential as privileged instead of essential. So let's talk about whether or not the 2 hours accommodation on shopping days is still relevant in this time. 1, and 2, if someone who is quote-unquote an essential worker and not on schedule to work on that particular day, can they still use that privilege on that particular day?
That's an interesting question, Mikey, because what the Act envisage is essential workers to and from work. But you may appreciate that you might not be on actual duty today, but you might have to be tomorrow. And so while you might not be going to work today, you would have to go to work tomorrow and therefore needs to refuel today in anticipation of that work tomorrow. But I want to draw your attention to essential worker, because we have had a lot of questions on who is an essential worker. And we did not design or come up with the concept. It is in the legislation. And being creatures of statute, we are obligated to follow the black and white for what is written. And it says, for the purposes of this regulation, an essential worker means an officer, staff, employee, or director of, and it gives a number of listing, which I'm going to just go through. The Royal Grenadier Police Force, National Disaster Management Agency, Her Majesty's Prison, Customs and Excise Division, the Accountant General, Ministry of Social Services, the Office of the Prime Minister, Ministry of National Security, Ministry of Agriculture, Waste Disposal and Sanitation Companies, any hospital or healthcare, medical, residential care establishment or facilities, and essential workers of the airport. You see, here is where it starts to make a distinction, because not all workers of the airport is an essential worker, even if the airport might be an essential service. So it speaks to essential workers of the airport, essential workers of the water sector or electricity sector, essential workers of the telecommunication sector, essential officers of any print or electronic media. So it doesn't envisage all of the employees to be considered essential worker. But it is for the organization to determine who among its staff, among its employees, are essential for the purpose of the regulation.
Mike, you have another question?
And I have a follow-up question. What about the privilege of using, so I understand your explanation, read the gas, but what about at supermarkets? Because we have had some concerns where persons who fall under the essential worker category would use that privilege even outside of when that privilege is merited.
Yeah, and that is true, Mikey, and that puts us in a difficult situation because at the supermarket lines, it is difficult to know at that point whether or not you're just from an essential services or whether you're an essential worker. So what we have been doing is on identification of oneself, we make the determination. So if you have an identification that says Nawasa, you may not be an essential worker, although Nawasa is an essential service. So we will facilitate you because you will appreciate the difficulty we will have at that point in making that determination whether you are an essential worker or you're just from the essential service. And having regards to the issue of food, we want to facilitate as much people as is possible. This is humanitarian gesture, and we wouldn't want to turn somebody back and find out later that they fit the description of an essential worker. So in the interest of fairness and in the interest of collectivism, we ensure that these people are served. So it may seem that they're having a privilege over us, but it's better to let them have the privilege to get some food than to deny them that privilege and learn tomorrow that they should have been accepted.
All right, I see Sherian's hand up. Sherian?
Yes, I want to go back to the amendment where alcohol can now be purchased. On visiting one of the supermarkets, I realized that there were limits in certain things that you can, number of items that you can purchase. Like if it's milk, you allow 4 tins or whatever it is. I saw that in real value. In terms of alcohol, will there be a limit what people can purchase? And what system place, you have lines after purchase to ensure that this alcohol is consumed in the privacy of the consumer?
Well, from law enforcement, we cannot determine, or the law doesn't say specifically the quantum of alcohol that one can purchase. That decision must be left to the particular establishment. Just as how they have restrictions on the number of tins of milk you can purchase, they may wish to put restrictions on the amount of alcohol you can purchase. But this is not a law enforcement issue. It is not enshrined in the regulation and is not something enforceable by law enforcement. But each establishment reserves the right to determine how they're going to run their establishment. The second question, how do we ensure that these alcohols are not consumed, is not something we can easily put a system in place for. We do have our checks and balances. We do have our static duties. We do have our roving patrol. We do have our undercover police officers out and about. And what we particularly will be looking for is consumption of alcohol in public, because this is what the Act speaks to. It speaks to consumption in the supermarket, consumption in the grocery store, and consumptions in the public. And we are doing as much as is possible to have our officers out there with eyes and ears open and trying to enforce this bit of the regulation as much as we can.
I have a question here. Sherry, just 1 second. Let me just get in 1 or 2 here. Superintendent Connaught, somebody's asking what arrangements, if any, have been made for the purchase of text gas, as these are often sold at gas stations which are closed.
Good morning again, and the question is pretty relevant, and we have had the occasion to allow for the sale of text gas. Much of the fuel stations that are authorized to sell text gas have been doing so. It is being done under a controlled environment where persons have to observe the protocols, the distancing protocol. But at DECO service station, and I assume that the other service stations that are available to service the general public on shopping days, if the service stations are open to the general public, not for fueling, but on shopping days for grocery, because most of them, at least some, have the capacity to serve groceries or sell groceries. the fueling or the refueling of the text gas can be done on those particular days also.
Somebody's also asking, for the shopping days, does the hour before and the 1.5 hour after the prescribed time still apply as stated in the Act?
Yes, the Act clearly says that you ought not to leave your house an hour before the designated commencement of shopping. So if shopping starts at 8, and it does start at 8, you should not leave home before 7. And you ought to leave home once between 7, which is an hour before, and an hour and a half after. The point here is you don't leave home, get some of the items, go back home and come back out. You ought to leave your home on one occasion during shopping day.
Okay, let's, Nisha, good morning. Hi, Nisha. All right, so, right, go ahead, we're hearing you.
Hi, are you hearing me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Hello?
Nisha, we're hearing you.
Okay, so my question has to deal with, my question has to deal with shopping days, right? And the shopping. For persons who don't have access to, transportation, access to supermarkets and so, what sort of mechanism is in place for them? Because some people have to travel very far, and then the supermarkets, the shops, they're not getting any supplies from the trucks. They're reporting that the trucks have not been coming up to so that they can purchase goods and so on. So for persons who don't have access to vehicular transportation, access that.
This is a concern that we have heard, and I'm sure we're going to continue to hear that concern. Because of the fact that public transportation are not allowed to run, we will continue to be saddled with this particular concern. But we know we live in our Grenadian culture. We're small, we are well knitted. I am sure that every individual can find somebody with a private transport to assist them. This is where we are now. These are not normal times, but we have to make do with what we have and network as much as is possible to ensure that people can get the supplies that they need. Because public transportation are not allowed to run. We don't want anybody to go hungry. But I'm sure that in our Grenadian, in the where we are knitted, the communities that we live in, I am sure that we can find some sort of assistance, somebody to assist us in doing that. And let me make mention to the talking you talk about the trucks and not reaching up. On days before, when this Emergency Powers Act started, things were not as it is now. We are evolving, and as we go deeper into it, some of the restrictions are being relaxed, some of the rules are being opened and widened, as in this particular case. Servicing of shops and supermarkets are now happening both today and tomorrow. This did not happen before. What we have had before is that the resupplying days were the same days that the supermarkets were open. There were outcry, the authorities heard those outcry, they have sat and have relaxed and extended that now. So I am sure that between today and tomorrow, the shops in the village, the shops at the hill, the shops behind the cocoa tree, they now have an opportunity to be able to restock because enough time is now being given. The whole of today and whole of tomorrow in anticipation of shopping days, which is Saturday and Sunday.
Okay, Sherian?
Okay, I just want to debate a bit. I just wanted to ask Superintendent Curwen if he can just give a roundup on curfew violators. Based on a video I saw circulating social media last evening.
Sharon, I'm glad you asked that question because in my wrapping up, I did intend to address it. So I was holding that for, but you asked it at a pertinent time. The purpose of the act is not to punish Grenadians. The purpose of the act is not to belittle anyone. The purpose of the act is to ensure that these viruses do not spread throughout the length and breadth of Grenada. And so we have restrictions that came into force to ensure that that does not happen. Clustering, the physical distancing protocol These things were put in place to ensure. And it's appalling that after weeks of being on television and appealing to the nation, the need to stay home, the lack of social activities, the no funerals, the no wedding, all geared towards ensuring that that virus does not spread. Lo and behold, yesterday, we had to arrest 10 persons in Guam who choose to go on the beach and cook and smoke and have a good time in spite of all of the warnings we have been putting out. It tells us clearly that while some people are taking these measures very seriously, being concerned about the health and well-being of themselves and their family, there are some in our midst who really do not care. They pay no mind to what is happening. Because after all of this, 10 persons were arrested for being out there, cooking, fetting, smoking, and having a good time. They were charged for violating the curfew. They were charged for possession of drugs, and they will have their day in court sometime when all of this is over.
And Super, if I may add here, the action of these individuals really does not represent the community from which they came from, because I have had in my sitting in at the Operation Management Control that a number of residents or citizens have been calling in to express their displeasure over the reckless behavior of some individuals in the community. And I want to appeal to all of the communities around Grenada to ensure that we take our civic responsibility very serious, and we call in those types of behaviors so that the police can readily address those issues and to ensure that persons are held to account for their reckless behavior. And again, I want to really congratulate those persons who have seen it fit to report those issues and to make readily available all the necessary information that would assist us in our general operations as we seek to restrict the spread of this virus across our island.
I think it's worth saying here, and I think it's worth adding to the point that Superintendent Connaught has made. I've been around the force now for a number of years, and I think this is the first time I've seen Grenadians pull together to ensure we avert and prevent the spread of this virus. We have had contributions, support from the public that perhaps we have never had before. We have had people calling in from different neighborhoods to say, hey, listen, I've seen somebody walking behind my house. I've seen two people on the street. I've seen somebody, where they ought not to be. And this tells you to lend to the point that Superintendent Connaught has made. Some people are taking this very seriously as they ought to. And when they see violations like I've just spoken about, they would call in. We have had support from the public, maybe as we have never had at any time in the history of the police that I have been a part of. I want to thank the public for that.
We have another question here. For farmers who have hundreds of pounds of perishable vegetables on hand and may want to get it to marketing board, what proof needs to be provided in relation to the emphasis on recognized farmers? What is considered a recognized farmer besides those with nurseries or animals?
I know there are registration farmers. Farmers were asked to register, and those who are registered and recognized are those that will be dealt with, because as it stands, everybody now is a farmer. And how do you know and identify and recognize a farmer? Is it because you plant 2 beds of cabbage, you're a farmer, or you're recognized by the marketing board or the Ministry of Agriculture as a farmer? And that's the issue we've been having, because I know for a fact that the Ministry of Agriculture have been asking farmers to register and be recognized as a farmer. And for those farmers who have done that, it's easy enough for them to say, I'm a registered, recognized farmer. But there are people who might be farming much more than some of these registered and recognized farmers who for some reason have not been registered. Now, how now do we know that you're a recognized farmer? How now do we know that you're a farmer in the first place if you're not so registered or recognized? And this is some of the challenges that we've been having. So after all of this is done, and I say after because I'm confident that we'll get out of this at some point, I'm appealing to farmers who are not registered. Please be registered, because now you're seeing how you're being affected by not registering. So when you should have access to the gas and when you should have access to the passes, you may not, because you're not recognized as a farmer because you're not registered.
Another question here. What strategy was used to determine the alphabetical arrangement for the shopping? Other islands have adopted that measure. Has the RGPF received positive feedback, any feedback at all from these countries?
I do not know whether there were any direct receipt of the sequencing. But what I do know is that I have seen quite a number of sequencing myself from different islands. St. Kitts have a sequencing that they use. And I believe that these other sequencing may have played a part in assisting our authorities here in coming up with what we now have. But I cannot say definitively what is the one overriding consideration that they would have used to come up with the sequencing. But as I said in the last couple of days, there have been several sequencing going around social media, and I'm sure, as we widely read, one of those sequencing perhaps would have caught the attention of the authorities, and they decided to come up with what we have now.
Okay, colleagues, so we've been on for about an hour, so it's 9:40. Let's try to wrap up by 9:45. I'm sure the gentlemen have other places to be, but I have another one here from Linda Straker. To you, Superintendent Curwen, clarify if the gas station attendants are instructed to not sell gas to all essential workers because pharmacists are not getting served. The attendant said the pass is for the pharmacy to open, not to supply with gas.
This is indeed new information to me, but once you are within the bracket of the identified essential workers, you will be served with gas, because we do recognize that pharmacies would be open at particular times, and if a pharmacist cannot get to the pharmacy, then there's no reason why a pharmacy would want to open. So pharmacists would be served. Obviously, you would have to produce some form of identification so that we can readily identify you as that category of individuals who should receive that service at the gas station. So pharmacists, they would be eligible to receive gas at the refueling stations. And just as Superintendent Curwen said, if the pharmacy is not open today and will be open tomorrow, and a pharmacist comes today at the refueling day, then we would serve them. We don't want to take the gamble of not having to issue fuel to a pharmacist and then subsequently resulting in a pharmacy or pharmacies not being able to open because we didn't exercise due diligence or we didn't exercise that level of discretion that is warranted in such critical time as now.
And I want to add to the fact that though those regulations are in place, we do not exercise in a draconian way. So even if it says one thing, understanding what is happening, we do bend. We use our discretion. Because under Section 5 that speaks of closure to businesses, pharmacies are an exception to businesses that ought to close. So you cannot ask a pharmacy to open and then say to the pharmacy attendees, we're not going to give you gas. So how are we going to facilitate that opening if you cannot get gas to come to the pharmacy and go back home? So, I am not going to dispute that has happened. I don't know where the information is coming from. But on the ground, we are very flexible. We use our discretion, and we try to serve people, even when we are doubtful as to who you are. At the times, we give you the benefit of the doubt in the interest of everything else that are happening.
All right, so we'll take the last few questions. I have one here. Can consideration be given to the technical crew that deal with phone credit top-up to service supermarkets when these supermarkets are open since people cannot top up their phones?
But these people are not on the list of exceptions, so I'll refer that request back to the Commissioner of Police, who in his committee, I'm sure perhaps is going to raise it. As I sit here, I'm not in a position to say whether or not this will happen. All I can say is that I will refer it up the chain to see what happens.
Will MoneyGram or Western Union be open at any time?
I am not sure whether there would be. I do know that last week some of the credit unions were open. I think some of the money remittances were open as well. I am not definitive as to whether or not they will be opening with the shopping days.
All right, so Sherry, do you have another question? We need to start wrapping up. Sherry?
No.
Somebody's asking, although I think you sort of answered that already. if consultation was done with the other countries regarding the name sequencing for the, I think we just answered that. Right. All right, so one other here, some people have to find their way to work, even as the regulations stipulate that the employer must provide transportation. What is the penalty for this violation?
This issue must first be reported and looked into, but according to the regulation, if your employer asks you to come out, your employer has that responsibility to ensure transportation is provided for you to and from work. If that is not happening, I am sure that those who are affected at some point may want to make an official complaint of that, and I'm sure it's going to be looked into.
Mikey, so we're going to make Mikey the last person. Do you have a question, Mikey? We're going to wrap up after you.
Okay, yes. In terms of ensuring that the police as well comply with the 6 feet social distancing, I just wanted to highlight in the same video that Sherry-Ann alluded to, I had some areas of concern there where I saw quite a bit of people being arrested, but the 6 feet social distancing was not being observed.
Mikey, that question, I'm going to attempt to answer this question from the angle that you ask it and from another angle. We're also hearing from the public who are concerned about law enforcement and our safety that when we travel in our vehicles, we're not adhering to the physical distancing protocol. You have to appreciate that in spite of what is happening, the dynamics of law enforcement is different. We do not have the resources that is necessary to carry one prisoner in a vehicle. We just do not have those resources. We do not have the resources to carry one police officer to a response in one vehicle. So what we do as police officers, we say to our officers, please wear your PPEs, wear your mask, wear your gloves, and as soon as you come out of the vehicle, you need to sanitize yourself and sanitize the vehicle. That is what we have been saying to our officers. So while we would have arrested 10 people and could not recognize the physical distancing protocol, this is the nature of law enforcement. But we try as hard and as much as is possible to keep the distance when we can. And when we cannot keep the distance, we try as hard and much as possible to ensure that we wear our gears and that we sanitize thereafter.
Mikey, are you done? You have another question? Okay, I think we should wrap up now. It's 1:45.
Now, as we come to the end, I just thought it was prudent for the benefit of Mikey and others who may have joined the program late and may have missed on some of the important points that we have made earlier. Just to give the takeaways from this morning presentation is these few points. That the curfew, the 24-hour curfew continues until the 20th of April 2020. That wearing of mask or other face covering now becomes a necessity. The law says we shall do that. So once you leave the confine of your residence, you're expected to be wearing a face mask or some sort of covering over your nose and mouth. Ticketing system for persons violating the provisions of the Act are now in place. Refueling days are today and on Friday at the Call, Victoria Gas Station, R&R in Grenville, and now Otway starting this morning. Resupplying and distribution is today and tomorrow. So businesses are clearing the containers, the crates, and the goods from the port in St. George today, and will be distributing to supermarkets and shops today and tomorrow only. Shopping days are now Saturday and Sunday in an alphabetical sequencing as we explain, A to M and N to Z. A to M is 8 to 12 on Saturday, and N to Z is 1 to 5. And on Sunday, N to Z is 8 to 12, and A to M is 1 to 5. I must end by expressing our profoundest gratitude to members of the public, members of the media, who for the last 2 weeks have partnered with us in getting the messages out. And for those of you in the public who have supported the efforts of the Ministry of Health and the RGPF in ensuring that we do what is necessary to get Grenada, to keep Grenada safe. You have been phenomenal. I am personally impressed with the calls we have received and the assistance given by our stakeholders. Members of the public, you need and deserve a tap on your back for ensuring that not only you and your family remain safe, but that Grenada on a whole is safe by the efforts you have put out in contacting us. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the day.